Paano nangyari ang Fukushima disaster? 10 years ago, ng isang normal Friday afternoon sa March, tumama ang pinakamalakas na earthquake ever recorded sa eastern coast ng Japan. Welcome back viewers! Ang video natin for today ay tatalakay sa pinaka-mysterious nuclear disaster na nangyari sa Japan noong March 1, 2011. Kasalanan ba ng earthquake na nangyari hours before the ensuing tsunami? Inside job ba ito kaya na-trigger ang meltdown? Alamin natin ngayon ang katotohanan at effect ng deadly nuclear disaster na nangyari sa Fukushima Daiichi Reactor Plant. Stay tuned until the end sa ating video para malaman niyo ang extent ng damage that this modern catastrophe caused. Noong 2011, habang kumakain ng hapunan at komportable na ang mga citizen ng Honshu, Japan sa kanilang warm na bahay, they definitely weren't expecting a disaster to come. Much more changed their entire lives. At exactly 7:37 p.m., a 9.0 magnitude quake ay tumama sa eastern coast ng Japan. Ang force nito was so violent that it shifted the earth of its axis permanently at nagresulta ito sa kamatayan ng higit 20,000 civilians as well as wiping out entire coastal towns off the map. Ilang minuto lang pagkatapos ng devastating earthquake na yon, bigla na lang napansin ng mga tao na parang umaatras ang shoreline. A telltale sign of an impending tsunami. Pabilisan silang nag-evacuate patungo sa city center or anywhere else na malayo sa ocean. But it was too late. A mere 15 minutes lang pagkatapos ng magnitude 9 na earthquake ay sumulpot ang isang napakalaking tsunami that was thousands of meters high. Ang destructive 1-2 punch ng consecutive natural disasters na ito lead to unfold damage and loss of life. Pero a few kilometers lang galing sa shoreline, ang Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Plant took the brunt of the damage. Ang mga napakalaking alon ay nag-surge above sa coastline defenses nila at eventually nabaha ang kanilang tatlong high-density nuclear reactors, sparking a major disaster both natural and man-made. Ang mga first responders at EMTs ay nagset ng exclusion zone that grew larger and larger dahil sa continuous leaks ng deadly radiation from the broken reactors, forcing more than 500,000 Japanese civilians and fisher folk na mag-evacuate at mag-relocate sa labas ng affected area. Pero hindi ito ang katapusan ng kwentong ito. Experts wondered kung bakit ba nag-meltdown ang tatlong reactors ng Fukushima Daiichi Power Plant when they were all modern designs na may automatic fail-safe mechanisms. At ang Japan naman, being the technological center of the world, would have safeguards at emergency protocols in place para sa mga disasters na ito. Ang lahat ng mga signs pointed to internal sabotage. Pero what was the real reason behind this disaster? Before we continue, huwag niyong kalimutan mag-like sa ating video at mag-subscribe sa aming channel for more quality content. Throughout the months later ng kasinungalingan, pointing fingers at misinformation, there's one story that stuck. Before nag-meltdown ang mga reactors, ang prior earthquake ay nag-knockout sa power supply ng nuclear plant. Sanhi ito sa pagtigil sa cooling channels para sa temperature control ng mga reactors. In a cruel and ironic twist of fate, ang mismong power plant that many people had relied on to provide electricity for them every day ay nawala ng power. At walang generator sa buong mundo ang pwedeng mag-supply ng emergency power para sa isang nuclear reactor, let alone 3. Ang story na ito ay ginawang poster explanation for the coming month. It basically boiled down to ang after effects ng earthquake. The tsunami, a unique unforeseeable surigay, ang Japanese word for act of nature, ay bumaha sa tatlong substation ng Fukushima Daiichi na nagresulta sa pag-shutdown ng lahat ng cooling mechanisms sa buong nuclear plant at nagsilbing simula para sa chain reaction of events that would cause the world's first triple nuclear meltdown to occur. Ngayon sa 2021, more than a decade later, pagkatapos ng tragedy, ang irradiated zone na na-implement ng mga authorities still remains in place at ang mga 500,000 displaced residents ay hindi pa makabalik sa kanilang tahanan at hanap buhay. Ang mga environmental scientists ay naniniwala na baka 40 years pa ang kulang para matapos ang radiation cleanup work sa affected site, which has already cost Japan trillions of yen despite ang mga donations ng ibang countries. What happened after the tsunami? What series of events led to the meltdown ng tatlong reactors? Well, ilang minutes lang pagkatapos ng devastating earthquake that hit prior sa tsunami, ang emergency systems sa Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Plant ay nag-detect ng impending tsunami, which is the usual outcome sa mga coastal areas pagkatapos ng earthquake. Automatically, shut down ang active reactors nila. Or at least it should have. In an ironic turn of event, nag-fail ang automatic safe system nila at hindi na-activate ang emergency diesel generators para sa constant coolant pumping around the reactor cores, which remain incredibly hot kahit ma-off na ito. Ang true sa kanilang predictions, a wave over 1,000 feet high, proportional sa magnitude ng earthquake, slammed into thick walls ng power plant at na-overwhelm din ang anti-water countermeasures nila, resulting in the imminent flooding of the entire plant at ang mga active at napakainit na reactor cores. Ang mga on-hand staff ay nag-rush in para i-contain ang situation at mag-restore ng functionality sa fail-safe mechanism nila. Ngunit hindi sila nakarating sa oras at ang 3 active generators ay nabahaan. And without specific coolant para mag-maintain sa kanilang working temperature, ang nuclear fuel ay nag-leak sa loob ng 3 reactors at ang resulting increase ng temperature caused them to overheat and partially melt the nuclear cores. Ito ang tinatawag nating nuclear meltdown. Ang Fukushima Daiichi Power Plant ay nagsuffer din ng mga chemical explosions which badly damaged the surrounding buildings. Ang contained radioactive material ay nagsimula ng mag-leak out sa labas ng plant and into the atmosphere at ocean, poisoning the air and sea life, prompting ang immediate evacuation sa site and establishing the ever-widening radiation exclusion zone. While kinukontinue ng mga plant workers ang kanilang mga attempts para ma-cool off ang reactors, ang appearance ng increased level ng deadly radiation sa local food at water supplies nila prompted Japanese officials na i-declare na unfit for consumption ang kanilang mga rations. Left hungry, thirsty, and tired, ang mga plant workers ay nag-decide that it was best for their health at ang kanilang safety na mag-evacuate sa affected site regardless sa increasing radiation levels. Sa pagkatapos ng March, ang radiation exclusion zone ay in-expand hanggang umabot ito ng 30 kilometers away sa power plant. Ang ocean water, which was reported to have been contaminated with lethal amounts ng mga radioactive waste, ay nadiskubre na merong excessive amounts din ng iodine, 131, na bunga ng mga unseen leaks of radioactive water dahil sa mga cracks, trenches, at tunnels between the plant and the ocean floor. Ang contamination na ito ay nagresulta sa obscene amount of death ang mga aquatic life at nag-cause din ito ng mutations sa mga surviving organisms. Eventually, on April 6, nagdeklara ang mga plant officials na ang cracks na yon have been sealed at later than that month, ang mga plant works ay nagsimula ng mag-pump sa irradiated water papunta sa na-establish nilang on-site storage building until it could be properly treated. How many people were hurt? Fortunately, walang recorded fatalities ang nailista sa panahon ng nuclear disaster na ito, pero at least 20 plant workers ay na-injured sa mga secondary explosions, habang hundreds and thousands of innocent people ay na-expose sa radiation while evacuating. Pero ang long-term effects ng radiation poisoning na kanilang na-contract is sure to make the rest of their lives rather difficult. Out of the 500 plant workers, higit 300 sa kanila ay dinala sa mga nearby hospitals sa labas ng irradiated zone, of course, para ma-treat in regard sa kanilang high-level exposure. Ayon sa statement na nai-release ng World Health Organization sa 2013, ang disaster na ito ay hindi magre-resulta to any observable increase in cancer rates. Pero ang mga adverse mutations na magresulta sa radiation poisoning na nangyari could be something that people need to watch out for. After all, especially susceptible sa radiation ang mga maliliit na bata at mga unborn babies. None of us would like to grow up with an extra foot o kaya kakulangan ng ating internal organs. Scientists, both inside at sa labas ng Japanese committee, ay naniniwala na aside sa immediate affected region of radiation around sa power plant, ang risk of radiation outside the zone will remain relatively low. At noong March 9, 2021, just before the 10-year anniversary ng Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster, nag-report ang local Japanese medical authorities na walang lethal adverse health effects ang na-document amongst the residents ng Fukushima that were directly related to the radiation na dulot ng disaster na yon. At nag-add din sila ng any future radiation-related health effects were unlikely to be discernible ayon sa kanilang report. Pero ang karamihan sa mga civilians at trabahante ay naniniwala na ang radiation dangers na ito ay far greater than the authorities say. Para sa kanila, it was just a lot of hot air and damage control para hindi magpanik at bigyan ng hope ang population. But still, most residents remain worried at cautious sa consequences sa pagbalik. Though ang mga officials ay nag-lift sa restriction in many nearby areas, Ang karamihan sa mga tao ay hindi pa gustong umuwi sa kanilang previous na bahay dahil sa sobrang abala. And in 2018, nag-announce ang Japanese government that mayroong isang worker ang namatay dahil sa radiation exposure and agreed his family should be compensated dahil sa kanyang service. Kahit isa lang daw ang namatay dahil sa direct effect ng radiation, a number of people have confirmed to have died noong nag-evacuate sila. Hindi lang ito na document, including dozens of hospital patients na hindi makagalaw at ang iba naman who had to be moved to fears of radiation. Ang Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster ay classified bilang level 7 event ayon sa International Atomic Energy Agency. Ito ang pinakamataas na classification para sa nuclear event na ito and only the second disaster to meet this classification pagkatapos ng Chernobyl. If you want to learn more about the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, go ahead and check out our channel. Whose fault is it? Ang mga critics ay nagsisisi sa kakulang ng preparedness sa event, as well as ang muddled response from both the plant operator, Tokyo Electric Power, TEPCO, at ang mismong media response ng government. Ayon sa independent investigation na naset up ng Parliament of Japan, nag-conclude sila na ang Fukushima nuclear disaster was a profoundly man-made disaster at isinisi din nila ang energy company for failing to meet safety requirements to plan for such an event. Pero noong 2019, the Japanese court cleared 3 former TEPCO executives sa kanilang negligence in what was the only criminal case to come out of this terrible disaster. Ayon sa Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihiko Noda, the overall government shared the blame para sa disaster na ito. And in 2017, ang Trial Court of Japan ruled na ang mismong government din bore partial responsibility para sa kanilang poor response to the disaster and is now required to pay compensation para sa 200,000 na mga destitute evacuees na nawalan ng bahay at hanap buhay. And that's our video for today. Hopefully you found this story interesting. If you want to hear more interesting stories, feel free to check our channel. Thanks for watching and God bless.